to me, part of the challenge within the Judeo-Christian tradition is coming in part from the Pope. The Pope isn't the only person that we should rely upon, but he's a very significant individual. But he seems to be saying we need to rethink some of our foundations across a lot of our ethical and moral presuppositions. Not necessarily to throw them out, but we should rethink those, recontemplate them, reproject them in a way that is centred around mercy and love and forgiveness, rather than being judgmental and being exclusive. The other thing he seems to be saying is that we need to readjust our behaviours, that is our personal behaviours, which are things we can control, things that we can do. Do we need to have 4 television sets in our house? Do we? Well, maybe we don't. Because 4 television sets means someone out there has to go and exploit the resources to deliver that product and create a market economy that probably disempowers some group of people on the other side of the world. And certainly they don't become the beneficiaries of that technology and that advancement. So we need to think of our own tendency to buy and sell and discard matters. And also we need to do that on a communal basis. Here in the Kimberley, which is a pristine part of Australia, the tension points between industrialisation and sustaining the environment in its pristine state to a fair degree is where this place is situated at the moment. Not uncommon to many other parts of the world or Australia. So it's a question of how we relate and how do we create the balance between what we want and what we need and what others need as well, and what the environment requires by way of our care. Because the two things are connected under the creation story, the 3 things: God, creation and humanity. If you follow that tradition, those 3 things are absolutely interconnected. We as humans have tended to forget that connectivity and have promoted man's capacity to dominate and exploit those resources virtually at will, and virtually to the extent of bringing human beings to the brink of its own extinguishment on this planet. So the challenges that throws up is also part of, I think, the work we have to do in this world if we're going to rebuild, reshape communities and rebuild societies. And we've got to engage in these new understandings, not for the sake of them being new, but I think it's almost as if we don't, then we will perish. It's a bit like some of the prejudices we used to see in the early days. One, people wouldn't allow people of colour to come into certain hospitals or, to visit particular offices, or people of colour driving past institutions that could help them with a sick child and travelling across town to an Indigenous clinic because they don't feel welcome in the non-Indigenous setup. So we've got to deal with those sorts of aberrations in our societies. So I think the Pope is asking us to re-grapple with all of these things about the foundations of our beliefs and our learnings, and to relearn what the truths are. Not that that's all been discarded, but to relearn those truths from a different angle of our analysis and perception, and to enter into dialogue, particularly dialogue with science and technology. It's not as if there isn't a dialogue between science and technology. And the old theology of philosophy and science and reason and theology and all of those matters, I think what's being asked of us, if we're going to do, if our families, if our communities and the church is going to be of any great relevance, then we've got to get a sense of the collective contribution that can be made by the expertise that resides in all sorts of quarters, particularly in science and technology, but also in philosophy and arts, in all sorts of other wisdoms. We've got to take a far greater openness to being informed for the betterment of our, not just for the bettering of our society, but for its sustainability. Because if we continue in an unbridled way, in an unchecked way, to exploit the resources of the world and damage creation to the extent that we do, then we've got very little hope, unless you're hoping to get a ticket on one of these satellites that's going to go out past Pluto or wherever they're going to and live out there. It won't necessarily get you closer to God, because it'll get you further away from the earth.